Have you ever noticed how the world seems to shift around you when you stop needing its approval? Not gradually, but suddenly, like a switch has been flipped. The invitations become fewer. The conversations grow shorter. The way people look at you changes not with pity, but with something far more unsettling: unease. You might think you're imagining it, but history tells a different story. Every civilization has feared one particular type of person above all others. Not the warrior, not the rebel, not even the tyrant, but the man who genuinely needs nothing from anyone. This isn't about being antisocial or bitter. It's about something far more dangerous to the established order: true independence. From the desert hermits who walked away from Roman society to the philosophers of the Renaissance who chose books over banquets, those who live without dependency have always been misunderstood, resisted, and when possible, destroyed. Why? Because they represent the one thing that no system of power can tolerate: proof that the game is optional. Machiavelli understood this better than most. He spent his life studying power, watching how it flows, how it's maintained, how it crumbles. And in all his observations, he noticed something that made even him uncomfortable. The man who depends on nothing cannot be controlled by anything. Not by threats, because he has nothing to lose that he hasn't already chosen to release. Not by rewards, because he has already found what he needs within himself. Not by public opinion, because he stopped listening to the crowd long ago. Such a man is dangerous not because he wants to harm others, but because no one knows how to bind him. Think about this for a moment. When you encounter someone physically strong, you might admire their discipline or envy their power, but you understand them. Strength can be measured, compared, even overcome. When you meet someone wealthy, you might feel inadequate or inspired, but wealth follows patterns you recognize. It can be earned, inherited, lost, stolen. But when you face someone who genuinely needs nothing from you, no validation, no companionship, no approval, something strange happens in your mind. They become a mirror, and mirrors have always been humanity's most feared invention, because they show us exactly what we do and want to see. The psychology behind this reaction runs deeper than most people realize. We're not just talking about social conditioning or cultural norms. This fear is wired into our survival instincts, carved there by millions of years of evolution. For most of human history, being alone meant being dead. The exile died. The outcast starved. The one who couldn't get along with the tribe became food for the wolves. So when we encounter someone who not only survives alone, but thrives in solitude, every ancient alarm in our brain starts screaming, this person shouldn't exist. They're breaking the fundamental rules of human survival. But here they are, walking among us, proving that our safety nets, our friendships, our families, our institutions, our carefully constructed social contracts are not the only path to survival. In fact, they're proving something far more disturbing, that these nets might actually be chains, and most of us are too comfortable in our bondage to notice the weight. This is why the solitary figure is not pitied, but feared. Pity would be the natural response to someone we believe is missing something essential. But fear? Fear is what we feel when we encounter something that threatens our understanding of reality. The man who needs no one doesn't just challenge our lifestyle choices. He challenges our entire worldview. He stands as living proof that the things we consider necessary might actually be luxuries, that the dependencies we've built our lives around might be prisons we've decorated to look like homes. History keeps repeating this pattern with uncomfortable consistency. The Stoic philosopher who owns nothing but his thoughts and finds complete contentment in that ownership. The monk who renounces all possessions and discovers that having nothing means lacking nothing. The wanderer who carries no home except his own mind and finds that everywhere becomes familiar when you at peace with yourself. Each of these figures unsettles the established order, not through revolution or rebellion, but through the simple act of existing independently. They cannot be tempted because they've already found what they were looking for. They cannot be coerced because they've removed the leverage points that make coercion possible. They cannot be bought because they've discovered that the most valuable currency is the one you mint yourself peace of mind, self-respect, inner stability. And in a world built on transaction, on the endless exchange of favors and dependencies, someone who operates outside the economy of need becomes impossible to predict, impossible to control, impossible to understand. Machiavelli warned rulers about this exact type of person. Never trust those who owe you nothing, for the man who needs nothing is bound only by his own will, and a will that serves itself cannot be bought. But there's something even more unsettling buried in that observation. If such people cannot be bought, if they cannot be controlled through the normal channels of power, then what happens when others start to notice? What happens when people begin to see that there is another way to live? This is where the fear becomes systematic. It's no longer about one individual who chooses solitude. It's about the idea of solitude itself, spreading like a virus through a population that has been taught to believe dependency is natural, even virtuous. Because if more people learn to stand on their own, entire systems built on their need would collapse overnight. But let's be clear about something crucial. Solitude is not loneliness, and the distinction matters more than most people realize. Loneliness is the ache for company, the desperate reaching toward others to fill some void inside yourself. It's painful, consuming, and ultimately self-defeating because it comes from a place of lack. Solitude, on the other hand, is the peace found in your own company, the contentment that comes from being whole without witnesses. It's not the absence of connection, it's the presence of self-sufficiency. The man in true solitude may speak little, but he listens deeply to the world, to his own thoughts, to truths that others drown in noise to avoid confronting. This listening gives him something that makes the crowd profoundly uncomfortable: clarity. He sees the games being played around him, not because he's cynical, but because he's not a player. When you're not invested in the outcome, you can see the rules more clearly. When you're not desperate for approval, you can recognize manipulation more easily. When you don't need to belong, you can observe without judgment, and observation without investment is the clearest lens through which to view reality. This clarity is what society fears most. Not the solitary man's isolation, but his insight. Not his withdrawal, but his understanding. Because when someone sees clearly, they become very difficult to fool. And systems of power, whether political, social, or economic, depend heavily on a population that can be managed through carefully curated illusions. So society tries to pull the solitary man back into the crowd, and they'll tell you it's for his own good. They'll speak of the importance of community, of human connection, of not isolating yourself from others. But watch their actions more than their words. The urgency in their voice, the way they seem almost offended by his contentment, the subtle ways they try to make him feel guilty for his independence, these reveal the true motive. They're not trying to save him. They're trying to tame him. We live in a world that rewards constant connection, endless visibility, perpetual communication. But the quiet man, the one who disappears for days or weeks into his own projects, who answers to no schedule but his own, who finds complete contentment in his own company, breaks the script. He shows that wholeness can exist without witnesses, that fulfillment doesn't require an audience, that peace doesn't need to be validated by others. And to a society addicted to external validation, this is almost heretical. So if you've ever felt truly at home in your own silence, if you've ever chosen to walk alone without sadness, if you've ever found yourself more content in solitude than in the loudest crowd, understand this. You are not broken. You are not cold. You are not missing some essential human component. You are simply harder to control, and that makes some people very uncomfortable. The world may never fully embrace the man who needs no one, but that's not his concern. His peace doesn't depend on their acceptance. His strength doesn't come from their approval, and his path doesn't require their understanding. He is complete in himself, and that completeness is both his shield and his power. Every empire fears what it cannot command. Every system trembles before what it cannot control. And nothing in this world is more ungovernable than a soul that stands complete in solitude. Yet there is a quiet paradox woven into living this way, one that becomes clearer the longer you walk the solitary path. The more you learn to stand alone, the more others feel compelled to define you, to place you in some category they can understand and thereby manage. They will call you distant when you're simply not performing connection for their comfort. They will label you guarded when you're merely protecting something precious. They will say you re-arrogant when you re-just not playing the game they expect everyone to play. But you're not playing their game because you've discovered it was rigged from the start. The game most people play is built on transaction time for attention, conformity for approval, obedience for security, pieces of your authentic self traded for temporary acceptance. But the solitary man operates in a different economy entirely. He trades in none of these currencies because he has discovered something the crowd has forgotten. Everything you actually need, you can provide for yourself. This makes him unpredictable in a world that has spent centuries perfecting the art of prediction and control. Throughout history, rulers, institutions, and communities have developed exactly two methods for binding the self-sufficient: temptation and isolation. If they cannot lure you back into dependency with rewards, better positions, social status, material comfort, they will try to brand you as an outcast, hoping shame will accomplish what bribery could not. But here's what they never quite grasp. Shame only works on those who desperately need to belong. Once you no longer fear exile, once you've discovered that being cast out is sometimes the same thing as being set free, you become essentially untouchable. Not because you've built walls around yourself, but because you've removed the very foundations upon which their influence depends. This is precisely why the man who needs no one represents such a dangerous idea to established systems. It's not about him specifically, it's about what he represents. Because if others see him not just surviving, but thriving independently, they might start questioning their own chains. They might begin to wonder if the life they're clinging to is really their own, or something handed to them by others who benefit from their dependency. Machiavelli understood that a ruler's greatest threat was never direct rebellion. Rebels can be crushed, uprisings can be suppressed, armies can be defeated. The most dangerous threat was the quiet example of freedom itself, because freedom is contagious in ways that force never can be. One free man is a seed, and seeds have this troublesome tendency to grow in places where no one expects them. That's why the solitary will always be both feared and secretly imitated. People may criticize your independence in public, but they'll study it in private. They may call your self-sufficiency selfish, but they'll wish they had it when their own dependencies start to strangle them. They may say you're missing out on life, but they'll envy your peace when their social obligations become unbearable. So you must decide carefully how you carry this power, because make no mistake, independence is power, perhaps the purest form that exists. It's not a weapon to be waved carelessly at others who haven't chosen your path. It's not a superiority to be lorded over those still learning to stand. It's a shield to be held close, protecting something infinitely precious, your ability to move through the world according to your own compass. The key is to live in such a way that your independence speaks louder than any argument you could make about it. Let your life be your proof rather than your words. Let your silence be your strength, and your solitude be your kingdom. Because here is the truth that the noisy world struggles to understand. The man who needs no one doesn't have to convince anyone of anything. His very existence is argument enough. Those who meet you on this road will be rare, not because they lack the capacity to walk it, but because most people are too accustomed to the safety and familiarity of the crowd to risk the unknown territory of self-reliance. When you do encounter them, you'll recognize them immediately, not by how loudly they speak or how much attention they command, but by something far more subtle. The steadiness in their eyes, the calm in their presence, the complete absence of grasping in their hands or desperation in their voice. These are the few who have also learned that a life worth living is not measured by how many people witness it, but by how faithfully it reflects what is true to the person living it. They won't compete with you for attention because they've discovered something better than attention: autonomy. They won't demand that you shrink yourself to make them feel more comfortable because they re-comfortable with themselves. In their company, there's no constant negotiation of identity, no exhausting calculation of who owes what to whom. This is the quiet gift that solitude eventually offers. When you no longer need to cling to others, the bonds you do choose to form become unbreakable precisely because they're free of desperation. They exist not because either party needs the other to feel complete, but because two complete people have chosen to walk in the same direction for as long as their paths naturally align. But such bonds are only possible after you've passed through the great trial that solitude demands of everyone who enters its territory. You must sit in the long, echoing silence and resist every urge to run from it, because silence will test you in ways that noise never can. It will bring to the surface every fear you've been too busy to face, every insecurity you've been too distracted to address, every unhealed wound that the constant shadow of the world has kept safely buried. This is why so many abandon the solitary path before they've truly begun walking it. They cannot bear to meet themselves without the comfortable buffer of constant distraction. They discover that solitude isn't just the absence of others. It's the presence of everything about yourself that you've been avoiding. And that can be terrifying for someone unprepared for the encounter. Yet for those who stay, who resist the urge to fill every quiet moment with noise, who learn to sit with their own thoughts without judgment or fear, something extraordinary begins to happen. The silence stops feeling like an empty room and begins to feel like open sky. The absence of external noise becomes the presence of internal clarity. And in that clarity, you begin to see not only yourself more honestly, but the entire world more clearly. You start to notice the subtle trades people make every day, fragments of their authentic selves exchanged for temporary comfort, pieces of truth swapped for social acceptance. You see how the fear of being alone makes people bend when they should stand firm, nod when they should question, smile when they should speak their truth. You realize just how fragile most convictions are when they rebuilt entirely in the shelter of group approval. This knowledge changes you in ways that can't be undone. It makes you quieter, not because you have nothing to say, but because you no longer feel compelled to prove yourself in every room you enter. It makes you slower to anger, because you understand that most attacks come from fear rather than malice. And it makes you almost immune to the kind of manipulation that works so effectively on those who are desperate for approval, because you've learned to live without the very things others would use as leverage against you. You don't become untouchable by building walls around yourself. You become untouchable by needing nothing that can be taken away from you. Your peace comes from within, so external chaos can't disturb it. Your worth comes from your own assessment, so others' opinions can't diminish it. Your security comes from your ability to stand alone, so no one can threaten you with isolation. This is the quiet rebellion of the solitary man in a world designed to make everyone dependent. He removes the handles that others use to steer him, not out of spite or superiority, but simply because he's discovered he doesn't need to be steered by anyone other than himself. And in doing so, he proves something that systems of power would rather keep hidden, that the choice to be free has always been available, waiting quietly for anyone brave enough to make it. The world will never fully understand or embrace such people, but that's perfectly fine. Their approval was never the goal. Their understanding was never required, and their acceptance was never necessary. A man who needs no one has already found everything he was looking for, and it was inside him all along, waiting patiently for him to stop looking everywhere else and finally come home to himself.